Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, December 6, 2023. President Joe Biden makes a last-minute appeal to Senate Republicans to not block a bill providing military aid to Ukraine because the bill does not have changes they want to U.S. immigration and border security laws, telling them this cannot wait and we can't let Putin win. But in the end, the Senate voted not to advance the bill by a vote of 49 to 51, short of the 60 needed. The Republican leader Mitch McConnell says his party is insisting on what he calls meaningful changes to the border. Attorney General Merrick Garland announces the first use of a U.S. war crimes law with charges brought against 4 Russian military personnel for torturing an American citizen in Ukraine after Russia invaded. U.S. House passing a bill to prevent the Environmental Protection Agency from going forward with new vehicle emission regulations that are aimed at reducing the number of gas-powered cars and trucks on the road and increasing the number of electric vehicles. The CEOs of the largest banks in the United States tell the Senate Banking Committee about new proposed minimum bank capital requirements, saying they would harm the economy if adopted. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says he'll resign from Congress at the end of the month. He was voted out of the speakership a few months ago, first House Speaker in U.S. history to lose his job mid-session. Supreme Court hears a case about job discrimination under the Civil Rights Act, asking the question, is it enough that a worker be involuntarily transferred because she's a woman to trigger a claim if the new position pays the same and is generally the same working conditions? And legendary TV producer Norman Lear has died at 101 years old. We'll hear him from a 2014 Book TV appearance. From the New York Times, President Biden called on Congress on Wednesday to put aside partisan differences and promptly pass a multi-billion-dollar aid package for Ukraine, warning that failure to do so could enable President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia to reclaim momentum in the war. Efforts to resupply Ukraine as well as Israel appear at an impasse as Republicans insist on conditioning aid to immigration measures that Democrats oppose. That from the New York Times. President Biden spoke at the White House.
Make no mistake, today's vote's going to be long remembered, and history's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win. Say it again, we can't let Putin win. It's in our overwhelming national interest and the international interest of all our friends. Any disruption in our ability to supply Ukraine clearly strengthens Putin's position. We've run out of money to be able to do that in terms of authorization. Extreme Republicans are playing chicken with our national security, holding Ukraine's funding hostage to their extreme partisan border policies. Let me be clear. We need real solutions. I support real solutions at the border. I put forward a comprehensive plan the first day I came into office. I made it clear that we need Congress to make changes to fix what is a broken immigration system, because we all know it's broken. And I'm willing to do significantly more. But in terms of changes of policy and to provide resources that we need at the border, I'm ready to change policy as well. I've asked for billions of dollars for more border agents, more immigration judges, more asylum officers. Republicans have to decide if they want a political issue or if they want a solution at the border. Do they really want a solution? It cannot be sustained as it is now. We need a real solution. And my team has been engaged in negotiations with Senate Democrats and Republicans on border security. Democrats have put forward a bipartisan compromise on the table. Leader Schumer and Senate Democrats also have offered to let Republicans propose amendments to that border proposal. But Republicans have objected. They said, no, we don't want you to even introduce your proposal, because then we're not going to, and even though the Democrats say you can amend it any way you want. No, we don't want to do that. This has to be a negotiation. Republicans think they get everything they want without any bipartisan compromise. That's not the answer. That's not the answer. And now they're willing to literally kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield and damage our national security in the process.
President Biden at the White House ahead of the unsuccessful Senate vote on whether to advance the bill that contains $61 billion in aid for Ukraine, plus aid for Israel, humanitarian aid for Gaza, support for Taiwan, all that, another $40 billion total, and tacked on by the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a bipartisan bill to crack down on fentanyl supply chains. The vote was 49 to 51 when 60 votes were needed to move forward. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, and all 49 Republicans voted no. The Majority Leader Chuck Schumer switched his vote from yes to no for procedural reasons, allows him to call for a vote in the future. Ahead of that vote on the Senate floor, Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the minority whip, talked about his party's position.
I support aid to Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine, and that I believe it is in our national security interest to support these allies. So I want to see us take up this national security supplemental. But national security begins at home. And we can't pass a bill to advance American interests abroad while ignoring the national security crisis at our own border. We owe the American people better than that. And, Mr. President, the Democrat leader needs to understand that Republicans are serious. We've said all along that this national security supplemental must address the national security crisis at our border, and we will continue to hold to that principle. And while we recognize that in a negotiation neither side will get everything it wants, the final border security component of this supplemental must have real teeth. Cosmetic measures are not acceptable. We can't afford anything less than real solutions to our nation's border crisis. Mr. President, 10,000 plus individuals were encountered at our southern border on Sunday, another 10,000 on Monday. It went up to 11,000. And as I said yesterday now, 12,000 in a single day. Things are getting worse, not better. And we have an obligation to do everything we can to get this crisis under control. This administration, as I said, something they've had no interest in doing. So I will vote against moving to the supplemental while it lacks serious border security policy changes, and I hope that today's failed vote will clearly demonstrate to our Democrat colleagues that there will be no national security supplemental without the kind of border security measures that we need to keep our nation secure.
Senator John Thune, the minority whip, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor, and he and, in fact, all 49 Senate Republicans voted no on advancing the bill that had over $100 billion in aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And they were joined in voting no by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont. All the other Democratic caucus members voted yes. The final vote was 49 to 51. It was short of the 60 votes needed to move forward. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Congress has approved over $110 billion in military and economic aid to Ukraine, most of which has been distributed. Today, the State Department announced a new $175 million package of weapons and equipment for Ukraine. That was from previously approved aid authorizations. C-SPAN spoke this morning with Michelle Hackman, Wall Street Journal immigration policy reporter, about why immigration and border policy has been holding up aid to Ukraine.
Some of the contours that we know are that, one big area that actually we believe that Republicans and Democrats were able to find agreement on is the idea of changing the initial standard that migrants have to meet when they're claiming asylum. You say, I fear going home. I fear persecution if I'm going to go home. I'm afraid I'm going to get killed. You used to have to clear this very low bar called credible fear. And it seems like both sides have agreed to raise that standard, to tighten it to something called reasonable fear. So basically, you'd have to show more evidence. And if you couldn't, you'd quickly get deported. That doesn't seem to be enough for Republicans, though. They're pretty upset about the fact that there's so many migrants crossing the border every day, about 8,500 we're seeing, that people are quickly being released and not even being given that screening. They're sort of just given court dates months or years into the future and sort of allowed to live in the country and work quasi-legally until they go to those dates and then get a decision. So it's a much harder discussion what to do with those people in that situation. Do you detain them all? Democrats have a pretty firm line against detaining families and particularly children. So I think this is going to be a pretty tough sticking point for them to get through if Republicans hold the line.
And for the Democrats' part, going beyond what you've talked about, why is that a no-go, a non-starter for them?
I think Democrats feel like major concessions on asylum policy are sort of slamming the door on this commitment we've had basically since the end of World War II to refugees. Our history is that in the 1930s and 1940s, we turned away many German Jews fleeing the Holocaust, and since then, we and other countries in Europe have sort of been dealing with the consequences of that and trying to decide, how do we decide when someone can and should seek safety. And the whole idea of the asylum system was that, we don't totally get a choice. If someone is going to die if we send them home, that we need to give them a hearing. And so I think totally getting rid of that concept is sort of a non-starter for Democrats. And it's hard to figure out how to find a middle ground with Republicans, because Republicans would mostly like to get rid of that system, especially at the border.
In this international aid package proposed by the White House, there is money for border security. Why is that not enough?
Because Republicans basically don't trust the Biden administration to use the money as they're saying they would. They've said in the past, we've given you money for things like more Border Patrol agents, to hire more judges, things like that. And they've felt like the Biden administration has used money to, instead of detaining people, to actually just release them more quickly from Border Patrol custody. The administration feels like one of its big priorities is, they didn't want images of chaos, of children basically, I don't know if you remember those pictures from the Trump administration of children in cages for days. I mean, the Biden administration has really prided itself on getting people out of custody very quickly, because you have really unsafe conditions if they stay longer. But that's become a big problem for Republicans, because they think that that's creating an incentive for more people to come. And the numbers, somewhat bear that out.
Michelle Hackman, Wall Street Journal immigration policy reporter on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. And in the late afternoon, the Senate did vote not to advance the $100+ billion bill that included aid to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, but not the border security changes the Republicans wanted. The Democrats have a 51-49 seat advantage in the Senate, and 60 votes were needed to move the bill forward. From ABC News, this story: in a historic move, the Justice Department on Wednesday announced it is unsealing war crimes charges against 4 Russian-affiliated military personnel with disturbing details of their alleged torture and inhumane treatment of a U.S. national in Ukraine following Russia's invasion of the country last year. This is the first ever time the department has filed charges under the U.S. war crimes statute. While in captivity, the U.S. national said he was subjected to 2 brutal interrogation sessions in which he was tortured by the 4 defendants named in the charges. He said he was stripped naked, photographed, and one of the defendants even staged a mock execution. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced these charges at the Justice Department in Washington.
We have all heard the accounts of Ukrainian civilians targeted and executed, Ukrainian children forcibly deported, and Ukrainian women and girls sexually assaulted. And as the world has witnessed the horrors of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, so has the United States Department of Justice. That is why the Justice Department has filed the first ever charges under the U.S. War Crimes Statute against 4 Russia-affiliated military personnel for heinous crimes against an American citizen. Congress passed the U.S. War Crimes Statute nearly 30 years ago to give us jurisdiction to prosecute war crimes committed against American citizens abroad. In an indictment returned yesterday in the Eastern District of Virginia, we have charged 4 Russia-affiliated military personnel with war crimes against an American citizen living in Ukraine. The charges include conspiracy to commit war crimes, including war crimes outlawed by the international community after World War II, unlawful confinement, torture, and inhuman treatment. Like all defendants in the U.S. criminal justice system, the defendants in this case are entitled to due process of law and are presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Attorney General Merrick Garland today at the Justice Department. Last March, the International Criminal Court opened a full investigation of alleged war crimes by Russia in Ukraine, and the court has already issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin, accusing him of personal responsibility for the abductions of children from Ukraine. President Putin today is in Saudi Arabia, meeting Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. An update on the war between Israel and Hamas. This story from Reuters. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres made a rare move on Wednesday to formally warn the Security Council of a global threat from the Gaza war, as Arab states seek to leverage that to renew a push for the Council to call for a ceasefire. He invoked Article 99 of the founding UN Charter that allows him to, quote, bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. That reporting from Reuters. This is Washington Today. The U.S. House of Representatives today passing legislation that would block the Environmental Protection Agency tailpipe emissions regulations that make it harder for gas-powered vehicles to be approved. And the White House projects by 2032 would have 2/3 of all new cars, SUVs, and light trucks electric, along with half of buses and garbage trucks and a quarter of long-haul freight tractor-trailers. The bill in the House today, titled Cars for Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act. One of the co-sponsors, Congressman Tim Walberg, Republican from Michigan.
EVs are $13,000 more expensive than the average gas-fueled vehicle. Repairs to an EV cost $2,300 more on average, leading to higher insurance costs, over $500 annually. The proposed standards are also unattainable. Our grid cannot handle power overload that's required. Plus, most of the country lacks the charging infrastructure needed for the mandate. We also don't have access to all the critical minerals to produce the vehicles or the capacity to refine those minerals for use in batteries. China controls most critical mineral mines, processing, and manufacturing for EVs. China has 78% of the world's cell manufacturing capacity for EV batteries. Have we already forgotten the disastrous realities of over-reliance on China for our supply chain? I have yet to hear a constituent say to me, we need our supply chains to be more reliant on China. Opponents of the CARS Act argue that EVs are growing in popularity and prices are dropping. If that's the case, why is the mandate necessary? Well, just last week, nearly 4,000 car dealers sent a letter to the administration pleading with them to pump the brakes on the proposed rule, citing lack of demand. Range of EVs is another concern. Currently, one charge couldn't even get me across my district. EVs have almost 80% more issues and are less reliable than other vehicles. Let me be clear. I'm not against EVs. I'm against EV mandates. A single EV battery requires mining of hundreds of thousands of pounds of minerals. Those minerals are then refined using energy from China's coal plants. Ironically, an EV mandate is not a silver bullet to reduce global emissions. Sadly, the biggest loser for this mandate may be the American auto worker, since significantly less labor is required to assemble EVs. The future of those working at engine plants, like the one in my district, are now in peril too. The administration should side with consumers and innovators, not pick winners and losers. EV will play a significant role in the future of the industry, but so should hybrids and other solutions as they become more functional, reliable, and affordable, and chosen by the consumer.
Congressman Tim Walberg, Republican from Michigan, debating on the House floor. Congressman Tony Cardenas, Democrat from California, opposed the bill.
I'm frustrated and disappointed, but not surprised to see my Republican colleagues bring yet another bill to the floor that puts polluters over people. Scientists continue to warn us that the world is on its way to get warmer and warmer and increase global warming temperatures. And if we want to avoid the worst climate changes, the worst disasters, we must reduce our air pollution. So why, when we know that the transportation sector is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, would we limit the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to carry out its authority to improve transportation emissions? And yet today's bill would kill our chances of getting on the right track and put us on the wrong track. Poor air quality and ever-worsening climate disasters are increasing. Our constituents are already facing these major problems all over our country. More than 45 million Americans, including many of my constituents, live within 300 feet of major roadways or corridors, which contribute directly to negative health effects like asthma, cardiovascular disease, and premature death. That's right, air pollution is a matter of life and death. Our work here in Congress will determine how livable our planet is, how our neighborhoods will be livable or not for generations to come. And today, my Republican colleagues have chosen to abandon a healthy and prosperous future for Americans and to choose big oil companies and their profits over people.
Congressman Tony Cardenas, Democrat from California, on the House floor. The House went on to pass this bill that would block the EPA's tailpipe emission regulations, sending it to the Senate. President Biden says that if it passes there, reaches his desk, he will veto it. From the Associated Press, the heads of Wall Street's biggest banks used an appearance on Capitol Hill to plead with senators to stop the Biden administration's proposed changes to how banks are regulated, warning that the proposals could negatively impact the economy at a time of geopolitical turmoil and inflation. The banks are adamantly against new regulations proposed by the administration that could hit their profitability hard, including new rules from the Federal Reserve that would require big banks to hold additional capital on their balance sheets. The industry says the new regulations, known as Basel Endgame, would curtail lending and weaken bank balance sheets at a time when the industry needs more flexibility. That was from the Associated Press. C-SPAN covered this hearing. Here is Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, chair of the Banking Committee, using his opening statement to speak against the bank's positions.
Most Americans think of a bank's capital, if you force people to think about it at all, most Americans think of a bank's capital as money stashed away in a vault somewhere. But that's not what it means. You all know that. Capital is just a way to fund loans and investments and risky activities in a way that can absorb losses if things go south. It means shareholders and investors are on the hook, not taxpayers. And what those glossy ads don't tell you is that your banks have been reducing your lending to small businesses and veterans and home buyers for years now, long before the new capital requirements were proposed. Remember that. These are proposals at this point. They haven't even been implemented. Be clear, absolutely nothing in these rules would stop your banks from making loans to working families, to veterans, to homeowners, to small businesses. Absolutely nothing. The reason banks might make fewer of these good loans in the future is the same reason we've been seeing less and less productive banking activity for years. It doesn't make your banks as much money as the risky stuff. You know that. We all know that.
Senator Sherrod Brown, Banking Committee chair at today's hearing, referencing some ads that have been running on TV in the Washington, D.C. market and some nationwide. After the witnesses, who were CEOs of large banks, gave their opening statements, Senator Brown asked them about the capital requirements.
Productive third quarter for your banks. Your banks, as you like to say, return capital to shareholders in the form of dividends and stock buybacks. During your earnings calls at the end of the third quarter, we heard statements about how you're going to continue to manage your businesses to deliver value to your shareholders. Of course, what we did not hear was any concern that your firms would not be able to meet the anticipated increased capital levels under Basel III Endgame. If I'm mistaken, I would like you to set the record straight for the public and the investors. Do any of you have any reason to believe that your firm would not be able to achieve the increased capital requirements if Basel III was adopted as proposed? Any of you think you cannot you cannot achieve the increased capital requirements? Raise your hands if you think you can't. Thank you. I think you've indicated your firms will be able to meet the enhanced capital requirements. It leads me to conclude that the proposed capital standards are not too onerous.
Senator Sherrod Brown. Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, is the ranking member on the Banking Committee. He, too, asked about the proposed bank capital requirements, and you're going to hear answers this time from Charles Scharf of Wells Fargo, Brian Moynihan of Bank of America, and Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase.
The chairman asked a question about, can you achieve the increased capital requirements? My question is, can you achieve the increased capital requirements without negative consequences to the economy and to lending?
Senator, we do have concerns that some of the items in the proposal will lead us to either increase the price or to reduce the amount that we lend.
There's a chart in the NPR that looks deceivingly simple. It says, here's the RWA before the proposal, and here's the RWA after proposal. It says 24% increase. That is a reduction in the capacity of this industry to serve its clients. No questions asked. The capital that could have been used to create those additional RWA incremental has to be used to sustain the same activities we have today with no risk from the day before to the day after and what the enterprise does. That's the point we're trying to make, is that this is about using our capital, whether we have it or not, and whether we have it to meet the new requirements to support additional activity, not the old activity, which doesn't help the American economy.
Thank you.
I think one of the frustrations you hear from this group up here is this question should have been asked before it went out. There's no question. We have to hold 30% more capital than international banks in the United States of America for every loan. A lot of loans have now fallen between, have become unprofitable. So a lot of loans, when we talk to Bill, they don't make sense for our company anymore. Small business, CDFI, solar, wind, middle market loans, certain trades you do with pension plans, et cetera. The work should have been done beforehand. By law, the QIS was the qualitative impact study should have been done beforehand. We had 10 years to do this, and it's shocking to me that we're sitting up there 10 years and we're talking about what's it going to do for small business, and we have to analyze it today. It shouldn't now. We all are going to fill hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of forms responding in a very detailed way to every single one of these things, but it was not thoughtfully done. I'm not sure it was shared fully among all the regulators. This should be relooked at.
And before I go to Ms. Fraser, my assumption is everyone's going to say, with consequences, that will be negative.
Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, ranking member on the Banking Committee, questioning the CEOs of Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and J.P. Morgan Chase at today's hearing. The other witnesses were the CEOs of Citigroup, State Street Corp., New York Mellon, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. And you can find the video in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. The proposed new big bank capital requirements from the U.S. regulators are known as Basel III Endgame. Basel comes from the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, named for where they meet, Basel, Switzerland. And Basel III standards came after the global financial crisis of 2007 through 9. And the U.S. regulators have extended the public comment period on the new regulations until mid-January 2024. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 70, NASDAQ down 83, S&P down 17. Washington today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you'll consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. A few more headlines. President Biden has signed an executive order making it easier for Native Americans to access federal funding. And he said he supports the idea of 6 indigenous nations from the U.S. and Canada competing under their own flag in the Olympics in 2028 for the sport of lacrosse. The president was at the White House Tribal Nations Summit today at the Interior Department in Washington. In this story from Politico, House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer told reporters on Wednesday he would support allowing Washington, D.C. to tax and regulate legalized marijuana if that is what the city wants. The article says the comments came after a meeting with D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, largely centered on rising crime concerns in the nation's capital. However, the rhetoric is significant, as congressional Republicans have insisted on a rider to spending bills in recent years, barring the city from legalizing recreational marijuana sales. D.C. voters overwhelmingly voted to legalize marijuana in 2014. That from Politico. A story from USA Today. Hunter Biden made another push Wednesday to testify at a public hearing of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, setting up a showdown with the chairman, who has already rejected the offer by insisting on a closed-door deposition to avoid grandstanding by Democratic lawmakers. The chair, James Comer, subpoenaed the president's son to ask whether his overseas business deals were a form of influence peddling, as House Republicans have alleged. Comer and Congressman Jim Jordan, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, threatened Wednesday to hold Hunter Biden in contempt if he defies the subpoena. But Hunter Biden has denied wrongdoing, and the White House contends the committee has pursued baseless charges to further a misguided impeachment inquiry. That from USA Today. that Hunter Biden testimony has been scheduled for December 13th. Today, President Joe Biden was asked about his interaction with his son's business dealings.
There's polling by the Associated Press that shows that almost 70% of Americans, including 40% of Democrats, believe that you acted either illegally or unethically in regards to your family's business interests. Can you explain to the Americans amid this impeachment inquiry why you interacted with so many of your son and brother's foreign business associates?
I'm not going to comment on that. I did not, and it's just a bunch of lies.
You didn't interact with many of their business associates?
I did not. There's lies.
President Biden at the White House with reporters. House Republican leaders have confirmed that the House will vote next week on formally authorizing its impeachment inquiry of President Biden. Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, said at a news conference on Tuesday that the vote is necessary because the White House is fighting requests for information.
The White House is stonewalling that investigation. They're refusing to turn over key witnesses to allow them to testify as they've been subpoenaed. They're refusing to turn over thousands of documents for the National Archives. And the House has no choice, if it's going to follow its constitutional responsibility, to formally adopt an impeachment inquiry on the floor so that when the subpoenas are challenged in court, we'll be at the apex of our constitutional authority. It will be a movement of a vote of the full House, and that will allow us to continue and continue on pace. This vote is not a vote to impeach President Biden. This is a vote to continue the inquiry of impeachment, and that's a necessary constitutional step, and I believe we'll get every vote that we can.
Among some of these moderates, that they're getting dragged into this, this is going to be a tough vote for them.
No, all the moderates in our conference understand this is not a political decision. This is a legal decision. It's a constitutional decision. And whether someone is for or against impeachment is of no import right now. We have to continue our legal responsibility, and that is solely what this vote is about.
House Speaker Mike Johnson on Tuesday. Richard Sauber, special counsel to President Biden, last month in a letter to House Republican committee chairs, called their subpoenas in the impeachment inquiry irresponsible and said despite the fact that after a year of investigating, voluminous records and testimony from dozens of witnesses have refuted your baseless allegations about the president. But he also wrote, you claim the mantle of an impeachment inquiry, knowing full well that the Constitution requires the full House authorize an impeachment inquiry before a committee may utilize compulsory process pursuant to the impeachment power, a step the Republican House majority has so far refused to take. That was in a letter last month, and the House has now scheduled a vote for next week. Congressman Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, the former House Speaker, has announced that he is going to resign at the end of the month. In October, he was the first House Speaker to be voted out of office in the middle of a congressional session. Congressman McCarthy posted a video.
17 years ago, I was elected to a seat in Congress that I couldn't get an internship for. Today, I sit here having served as your whip, leader, and as the 55th Speaker of the House. As the son of a firefighter from Bakersfield, my story is the story of America. For me, every moment came with a great deal of devotion and responsibility. Giving my best to all of you has been my greatest honor. I'm proud of what we have accomplished. We won a House majority twice. We elected more Republican women, veterans, and minorities to Congress than ever before. We reduced the deficit by over $2 trillion while protecting the full faith and credit of our nation. We kept our government operating and our troops paid while wars broke out around the world. Traveling the country and serving with all of you, I have encountered far more people that want to build something than those who want to tear it down. I have faith in this country because America is more than a country. America is an idea. Today, I am driven by the same purpose that I felt when I arrived in Congress. But now, it is time to pursue my passion in a new arena. While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much. To all those who have supported me through the years, especially our constituents, thank you from the bottom of my heart. We did our part. And when the stakes were the highest, we rose to the challenge. We were willing to risk it all no matter the odds, no matter the personal cost. Simply put, we did the right thing. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America. That's a wrap.
Congressman Kevin McCarthy, former House Speaker, in a video. At the end, he removes his microphone clip to his shirt and then walks off stage. Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, who made the ultimately successful motion in the House in October to remove Speaker McCarthy, posting one word, McLeavin. A special election will now be called to fill the vacancy for California's 20th congressional district, expected sometime in 2024, and that district is considered solidly Republican. From thehill.com, Senate Republicans on Wednesday blocked efforts by Senate Democrats to pass an assault weapons ban and universal background checks legislation after the United States, over the weekend, broke the record for most mass shootings in a single year. That was from The Hill. First up was the assault weapons ban. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer asking unanimous consent to pass it, and Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming rising to object.
Americans have a constitutional right to own a firearm. Every day, people across Wyoming responsibly use their Second Amendment rights to keep and to bear arms. Today is about defending those rights against those on the other side of the aisle who wish to take them away from us. Democrats are demanding that the American people give up their liberty. The Democrat legislation takes away a right, and it does not provide Americans security. Democrats want Washington to ban rifles and pistols because of the way they look. To do this, they describe semi-automatic rifles as assault rifles. They aren't. Any farmer, rancher, or outdoorsman in Wyoming can tell you. These rifles work the same way as popular shotguns and other rifles used for hunting and for personal protection. Instead of facing these facts, Democrats stick to demonizing rifles and disrespecting gun owners. Democrats' ban on assault weapons is an assault on lawful gun owners. There's a contradiction at the center of the gun control debate. Democrats want to enact new laws on law-abiding citizens. At the same time, they ignore the lawbreakers.
Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, on the Senate floor, objecting to the unanimous consent request by the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, to pass the assault weapons ban. After that objection, Senator Schumer responded.
We already have a decade's worth of proof that a ban on military-style assault works and saves lives, plain and simple. After I led the passage of the assault weapons ban, I carried the bill in the House as a congressman, alongside our late colleague, Senator Feinstein, who carried it in the Senate. What happened? America saw a significant decrease in mass shootings and in gun deaths, a decrease. Unsurprisingly, when that ban lapsed, there was a sudden and dramatic spike in mass shootings and deaths from those shootings. We must change that. We still feel the unquenchable suffering of the families of Sandy Hook, where 11 years ago, next week, 26 innocent lives were cut short by an automatic weapon. I still see the pictures of those little children, and I still remember, because I speak to them all fairly recently, the parents who have a hole in their hearts forever because some madman with an assault weapon was able to kill 26 of them, one after the other. We still feel the agony of places like Buffalo, where a year and a half ago, a gunman murdered 10 people in cold blood at a Tops grocery store. I was at that grocery store a few days later. I still feel their pain. We feel the pain of Uvalde, Las Vegas, Orlando, El Paso. The list sadly goes on and on and on. And we also take action today because of tragedies like the Long Island Railroad massacre that happened 30 years ago tomorrow in my own backyard. the innocent people who lost their lives at the Maryland train station. It was the 5:33 train filled with commuters heading home from work. So many injured, 6 killed. My heart still sinks, and I'll never forget hearing that news. The river of blood in the aisles of the commuter railroad train. Just horrible. By passing the assault weapons ban today, we can help save lives, get these weapons off our streets, and prevent future tragedies. So today, Republicans face a choice, as they do every day. We say to our Republican friends, stand with families fearing for their lives, or stand with the gun lobby and block this assault weapon ban.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the floor after his unanimous consent request to pass an assault weapons ban was blocked. After that, Senator Christopher Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, asked unanimous consent to pass a bill that provides universal background checks for firearm purchases, and that was objected to by Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah. As that was happening on the Senate floor, news coming out of Las Vegas that there was a fatal shooting at the University of Las Vegas, Nevada. One suspect is dead, according to authorities, and at least 3 victims in unknown condition, according to the sheriff. Washington Post, previewing today's Supreme Court oral argument, writes that the court will hear arguments in a case with potentially sweeping implications for workplace discrimination claims, especially those mirroring the complaint of the petitioner, a female police sergeant in St. Louis who says she was transferred out of a prestigious role because of her gender. The case, Muldrew v. City of St. Louis, is being closely watched by civil rights groups who argue that valid workplace discrimination claims are often dismissed in court because of a requirement that plaintiffs proved they were harmed by the actions of their employers. The Biden administration is supporting the petitioner because it says that Congress never intended to impose such a requirement regarding job transfers. The case is also being watched by employment attorneys and some conservatives who say a broad ruling for Muldrew could open the door to a flood of reverse discrimination claims against certain workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, such as mentoring and training programs for underrepresented groups that ordinarily would not survive in court. That was from the Washington Post. Here is a few minutes of the oral argument. Justice Clarence Thomas questioning Brian Wolfman, an attorney for Muldrew.
It doesn't matter if her salary is the same, the work arrangements are the same. I know your argument in the briefs is that her assignments changed, but her pay did not and her rank did not. But none of that is necessary for you under your argument to make a claim.
That is correct, Your Honor.
The mere transfer is
well, the transfer, we wouldn't say mere in this particular case with respect to Your Honor.
Well, transfer alone.
But the transfer itself makes the claim actionable if she was treated differently than a male employee would be under the same
circumstances. So what work does the preposition against provide?
It provides that the treatment has to be worse, and there may be circumstances which.
So how is it worse, though? I mean, you're saying 2 things. One, you say that the mere transfer is enough, and against adds nothing, or it requires that the treatment be worse. But I don't. Beyond the mere transfer, you don't argue that you need anything else.
That is correct with respect to, that is absolutely.
So what work does against do?
The word against is indicating that the operation of the conduct is against this particular employee. So that's the work that the word against is doing. It could be that it's just for emphasis, and there may be limited circumstances, as this court indicated in Bostock, where different treatment among men and women is not necessarily discrimination. But by and large, when a male employee, if we're taking sex discrimination, is treated differently from a female employee in similar circumstances, or would be treated differently, that's discrimination against, in this case, the female employee.
Brian Wolfman, an attorney for Muldrew, in the case Muldrew versus City of St. Louis, questioned by Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas during today's oral argument. asking the question whether transfers or being denied a transfer under certain circumstances could qualify as a claim under the Civil Rights Act. Norman Lear, television writer and producer and founder of the group People for the American Way, has died at the age of 101. The New York Times writes that Lear introduced political and social commentary into situation comedy with All in the Family and other shows, proving that it was possible to be topical as well as funny while attracting millions of viewers. And those other shows include Maude, The Jeffersons, and Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman. In 2014, C-SPAN 2's Book TV featured Norman Lear at the Miami Book Festival on his book, Even This I Get to Experience. An audience member asked him about how he was able to air controversial subjects in his shows in the early 1970s.
There's no subject we dealt with that isn't part of the everyday American culture. There isn't a family in America that hasn't lived or known a family who did live with up the street, down the street, or across the street. There's nothing we dealt with that wasn't common to every American family. It is the establishment that doesn't think they're ready for this. You know, they're going to go nuts, or sponsors are going to get 60 letters from people. This is the danger Carol raised of the religious right. It's a narrow group in America, but they can make an awful lot of noise. So you deal with a subject like that, and the Maude episodes proved it. When Maude had her abortion, there was no big hurrah after the show or huzzah after the show. There were a modest amount of letters, people who were thrilled with it or unhappy with it or like any other show. But when the show, that was in, let's say, October, when the show went into reruns in May or April, then the religious right was ready for it. They knew it was coming. Then they lay down in front of cars, and William Paley's car in New York, my car in L.A., and carried on. But the American people what the American people don't have is the information they need to be the citizens they ache to be, and the encouragement along those lines to be the citizens they ache to be.
Thank you.
Norman Lear, TV producer and writer, founder of the group People for the American Way. In 2014 at the Miami Book Festival on C-SPAN 2's Book TV. He has died at the age of 101. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, former House Speaker, Democrat from California, posting on X, "Today we mourn the loss of the legendary Norman Lear, a decorated veteran, a patriotic champion of our civil liberties, and towering titan of American culture. Norman broke down barriers between communities and inspired generations of Americans with his magnificent artistry." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. It is free. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.